What's up, gents? Welcome to another episode of the Pearl Snap Tactical Podcast, the show that gives you the tips and tools that you need to make yourself faster, stronger, and harder to kill. Straight up on the docket today, gents, we're going to dive into one of the more heated debates, I think at least, in the probably one of the more interesting ones at least, in the firearms and training community, and that is whether or not civilians should be training in CQB, i.e. close quarter battle. Is it a useful skill or a fantasy-driven distraction or something in between? If you've spent any time in the training world, you've probably heard both extremes. You've got one side, one camp that says civilians have no business learning room clearing. It's dangerous. It's complicated. They don't have the time and the discipline to devote to it. They should be focused on marksmanship fundamentals and other practical things. And then on the flip side, there's a camp of folks that say CQB is an essential skill, essential to defending your home or your loved ones. So which is it? So in this episode, I'm going to lay out both sides of the argument. I'm going to share my own view and maybe challenge a couple assumptions along the way. So whether you're in the military, my military guys, my law enforcement officers, or just a civilian shooter, there's going to be something in here for you. Now, before we start, I just want to give a quick shout out to my premium subscribers on Substack. I really appreciate you guys. Originally, this was going to be meant for a members only episode, but since we are in the 4th of July weekend, I thought I would go ahead and make this available to everybody, but fear not for those of you who are premium subscribers. I'm working on an episode for you. I've got it in the queue ready to go. I just wanted to go back and do a little bit more research and flush out some of the details that we're going to be talking about a little bit, but that one's forthcoming. If you would like to be a premium subscriber, it's just a few bucks a month. Head over to our Substack page. You can have a free account. You've got access to all the open source episodes there, but you hit the upgrade button and you get bam, you're right inside and you get access to members only content too. So I really appreciate you guys. So we're talking about CQB for civilians. Is it a valuable skill or just tactical LARPing? It's all inside of this episode's or this week's episode of Pearl Snap Tactical, and we're starting right now. From an undisclosed location south of the Mason-Dixon line. This is, as always, Pearl Snap Tactical. All right, let's get into it, gang. So part one, what is CQB really? Before we start debating its value and we start getting our socks on over our boots, let's go ahead and define what CQB actually is. Now, Alex and I, way back, did an episode about this, and that show was entitled CQB Essentials. I just put the link in the script and show notes on the Substack page, so you can access it there. If you haven't listened to it, you can go back and listen to it first or after, but that's where we really break down the principles of CQB and best practices, newbie mistakes, all that stuff. So we did a deep dive on that, so you can hit it there. Now, without rehashing all that information that we covered in that episode, I'll just say that close quarter battle can refer to high-risk operations conducted in close or confined spaces. So usually people are thinking buildings, hallways, stairwells, where speed, surprise, violence of action is key. And it's typically team-based, but there's one-man CQB as well, but there's a heavy focus on angles, sectors of fire, communication, rapid threat identification, and stuff like that. It's more nuanced than that, but the purposes of our transmission, that's kind of what we're talking about. Room clearing is a subset of CQB. It's not all of CQB, but for our purposes, and just because in the common vernacular, when people say CQB, they're usually talking about room clearing, right? But just so that you know, it's not just fighting indoors. So it's a methodical, high stakes discipline. It's born from the military, bled into the law enforcement missions, centered around things like hostage rescue, counterterrorism, drug raids, high value target capture, stuff like that. And the distinction matters because when we're talking about civilians training in CQB, we really need to ask the question, are they trying to replicate the mission, or are they borrowing other methods to improve other skills? I think that's where really the debate in all of this is getting lost, right? I think if we can answer, especially if you're a civilian, if you can answer that question, if you have an interest in pursuing this type of training, if you can answer that question, I think the rest will take care of itself. And that is, are you just trying to replicate other people's mission because it looks cool and you're interested in it? Or are you trying to acquire these skills and borrow these methods with a view of improving other skills that are germane to you, right? I think that's where things are getting lost in translation in this whole thing. And of course, controversy always drives views. So, without just being too cynical about it, I don't doubt that some people are just, love to chime in and raise controversy just for the sake of being out there. I don't know. Anyway, I don't want to get into all that. All right, so let's look at the critiques. Many professional voices in the training community argue that civilians don't have any business learning CQB. And I will say that, depending on context, the reasons aren't without merit, right? So argument number one, lack of contextual needs. So the argument would go, civilians aren't breaching doors to serve warrants. They're not clearing terrorist hideouts. Their job really shouldn't be to go into the fight. It's to avoid the fight when possible, right? So these tactics, the tactics designed for direct action missions, might be misapplied. All right, so that's argument number one. I can understand that, right? And that should make sense to you too, I would imagine. Argument two, high skill, high risk. CQB is unforgiving. One bad angle, one lapse in trigger discipline, someone's going to get hurt. Maybe the wrong person get hurt or killed. So even professionals train constantly, and they still make mistakes. There's a really good book out there by one of my heroes, Paul Howe, former Delta guy, called Training for the Fight. And one thing I really love about that book is he usually all along throughout the book and pages of the book, he talks about mistakes that they made in Delta or CAG or however you want to refer to that unit, that they made along the way. Sometimes training missions, sometimes out when they were out on deployment. And I just think that was really cool that he was honest enough to share that even people at the highest level of the profession still make mistakes. So how much more so for civilians that don't put in, and really can't because we have jobs and things like that, can't put in those kinds of reps that are needed for something like this that is so high risk and requires such a high level of skill. So like I said, civilians in most cases lack the time and the repetition to build safe, effective CQB habits. That's argument number two. Again, I can't argue with that. That makes sense. Argument number three, no support structure. So like we said, this will riff off of argument number two, that CQB being a high risk, high skill game, when you're in a situation where there's no comms, no backup, no QRF, no medevac, right? If you're clearing a hallway solo and it goes sideways, there's no team coming in behind you. There's nobody in your stack, if you will, right, to help you out. And the risk escalate quickly without the structure of an organized force behind it to execute the mission, right? Again, makes sense. Argument number four, and I think this is where seems to be a lot of the emphasis is put on, is that people that indulge in this on the civilian side are just pursuing fantasy-driven training. There's a concern, and it's real, that some civilians are just chasing CQB for the wrong reasons. They're not training to be protectors. The argument goes they're just LARPing, right? They've watched too many tactical Instagram reels, too many YouTube videos, and want to be Delta for a day, right? And that mindset can breed recklessness, right? These are fair critiques, I will be honest, and we should take them seriously. But I don't think that that's the whole story. So let's roll into the next part 3, which is the case for civilians learning CQB, right? And this is where I would offer some pushback, right? Because I do and I have taught CQB to civilians, but I've only done it under the right conditions. And here's why. So point 1, the thing that I like about CQB for civilians, when they are ready to progress it, I would never advise someone who's just getting into the shooting and things like that to pursue this type of training. This is more advanced stuff. But for those who are have a grasp of the fundamentals, I think CQB has a lot to offer, right? Because it demands, for all the reasons that the detractors kind of put against civilians training, are the exact reasons why I think it offers some value, right, to those who are ready. Number 1, because it demands mastery of the fundamentals, right? It's a great way in a training environment to validate your skill set to a certain degree, right? CQB is a forcing function, right? In that sense that it demands a tight muzzle control. It demands fast and accurate shooting. It demands solid movement. It demands a level of communication and decision making. And it gives you an opportunity in a training environment to expose gaps in your fundamentals, and it forces you to fix them, right? It can be quite sobering when you go into a shoot house or even a glass house and you make a mistake and shoot the wrong target, or your shots are off or anything like that, right? In that way, it's one of the most honest training environments that you can step into. And it's a truth teller. If your trigger discipline is sloppy, if your movements are erratic, if your situational awareness is poor, CQB will let you know fast, right? And that's why I think in that respect, it is valuable. It puts pressure on your core skills, and it gives you immediate feedback. And weakness can't hide in the shoot house, right? So let me go back and say, when it puts pressure on your core skills and gives you feedback, of course, that assumes that you have the core skills developed, right? If you don't have them, then you're not ready to pursue this type of training. Point 2. CQB has some home defense applications. Now, civilians as a whole, right, don't need to clear buildings until they do. You know, if you have kids in bedrooms down the hallway, right, you may need to move them or move to them, right? You may need to clear the hallway or a room solo under stress. Having a foundation at least of or an understanding of CQB concepts like threshold evaluation, angle management, limited penetration, just to name a few, could give you an edge in protecting your family, right? No one's advocating that you go and just clear houses for the sake of clearing houses. No one's advocating that civilians even clear their own home if there's a better way to effectuate help and assistance to help alleviate, whatever the situation is that you find yourself in. But if you live in a very rural area where help is the response time to law enforcement is slow, right, or virtually non-existent when it matters the most, having an understanding of these principles in a limited context, right, might be valuable to you. And point 3, decision-making under stress. CQB scenarios, especially force-on-force, training, right, helps train rapid threat identification, target discrimination, and helps you develop judgment. In our last episode, we talked about tactical decision making, right? This is one of those opportunities that CQB offers to where you can help hone and develop that. It's not the only way to do it, but it's a good way, I think. And that's not fantasy, right? That's the kind of stress inoculation that prepares you to make life and death decisions under pressure. Point 4, discipline and humility. Good CQB training humbles people, right? It teaches you that you're not invincible. It teaches you that you are vulnerable. It reinforces the idea that avoiding a fight, if you can, particularly in a civilian context, is preferable, right? If you can avoid it. And the right training doesn't inflate your ego, right? If you're doing this right, you shouldn't be walking away from the shoot house session with an inflated sense of yourself, right? You should, more oftentimes, you should be walking away with kind of a sober recognition of where you are and how much more work you need to put in to get to the level that you aspire to. So I think it has a tempering effect on people, at least what I've seen in my own experience. And point 5, access to quality has improved, right? Things have come a long way. We're no longer in an era where CQB training was locked behind a gate. Today, there's not a lot of them, but they are there. There are instructors out there with real-world experience that offer structured, safe, civilian-accessible CQB courses. So when it's done right, the training is incredibly valuable. And so I don't see a downside when someone's ready and they avail themselves of a good instructor in a good environment where they can access this training. I don't see the downside in it, right? So let's move on to point 4. But again, I don't want to keep caveating everything I'm saying here, but again, it's for those who are ready, right? You're probably going to do yourself more harm than good if you're not ready to take on this kind of training, right? So make sure your skills, your fundamentals are on point before you even think about it, right? Just swallow the ego, get where you need to be, and then when you're ready, pursue this if that's something that's an interest to you. All right, point 4 or part 4, the middle ground, right? CQB is context, not combat. What do we mean by that? Here's what I believe. And I've kind of already let the cat out of the bag, but I'm going to go ahead and double tap on this. So CQB training for civilians can be valuable, right? But it needs to be contextual. So when I've done this, I don't teach civilians how to raid a meth house, with the 6-man stack, but we will learn principles, right, of CQB, and then we will talk about how those principles would apply in their own life, like moving through their home, how to manage corners, how to protect their loved ones that they have a responsibility to protect, how to make better decisions under stress. If that's your focus, if that's what's drawing you to CQB, then that's not fantasy. I don't think that's LARPing. I think that's really just trying to avail yourself to the tools for your survivability, right? So it really does come down to intent. If you're training for competence, for clarity, and for protection, then I would say pursue it, right? I would say put yourself out there on a pipeline to access that training. If you're playing for war and or some kind of indulge some fantasy, or I don't know, or something like that, you're probably just wasting your time at best, and at worst, you could really be putting yourself in danger, and most importantly, other people as well. So, part 5? What should civilians prioritize? So, like I've said earlier, and I'll be clear, CQB is not where new shooters should start. If you haven't mastered your draw, if you're not good on target transitions, if you're clunky in your movement, if you don't have fluidity in your movement, or your decision making, right? This is not the time for you to pursue this training yet. So this is what I like to see people focus on first, right? And this is just my list. I'm not, someone else might have a different list too, but here's some things. Shooting fundamentals, got to have that down. And then being able to execute the basics at a high level under pressure, right? So that's where standards, right? So maybe do a little research and find some qualification courses that have maybe a time component to it, right? That will induce some pressure. I think one qual that I like, that I've taken a lot of church groups through that are armed, is the FBI qual. I think it's really good. The current standard starts you at 3 meters with a draw, and it includes everything from up close, like to 3 meters, and you end at 25 meters or yards, and you end from there. It has you doing reloads. It has you doing one hand shooting. It basically covers just about every situation as far as distance to the target and the type of draw that a civilian could maybe find themselves in, and it has each course of fire is timed. So being able to perform, again, some type of metric or standard to measure your skills, right? That'll give you an indicator of where you are. So I think that's something you should pursue first. Movement and understanding movement with purpose. That's important. We've talked a lot about in other episodes about movement, maneuver, those types of things. So finding training that teaches you how to do that. I think that's something that you need to do, because that is what CQB, there's a huge component, is being able to move fluidly through the funnels, right? Through the fatal funnels, right? And to be able to do that without tripping over yourself, and to maintain your eyes up and scanning the room for threats, things like that. So movement's pretty key. Communication with loved ones, right? Being able to communicate effectively, right? That's something that is not drilled in enough, I think, in civilian courses that I've seen. So that's something that we try to address in a lot of our courses, to at some point in the training include some kind of communication piece to get people used to that. Use of force law. I think that's something that you should be brushed up on. We've had Andrew Branca on the podcast before. He's a great resource for that kind of thing. Masad Ayub is a very prolific writer and content creator in this space. So I think getting versed in your use of force law, that's pretty important. Medical training, that's a non-negotiable. As Alex said early on, several times in our season 1 at least, he's like, if you're going to train to take a life, you better know how to save one too. And I think that's fair, right? So medical training, you're more likely to have to save somebody. You come up onto a car wreck scene or something like that. It doesn't even involve guns, right? You're more likely to come across a situation like that where the demands of that kind of training are apropos versus your gunslinging skills. So don't neglect your medical training. Situational awareness and de-escalation. Again, that's something that you will use on the daily. We've had law enforcement officers on this show before have said, man, I've used de-escalation skills a lot more than I've ever used my gun on the job, right? Those kinds of things. Those are very important. I would pursue that training first if you haven't. And then looking at your home defense planning. That will help you tailor what you need to be adding into your training regimen, that kind of stuff. So then again, and we could add to the list, right? And not that you will ever master these things completely. We're always training, we're always improving, but you can reach a certain level where you're competent. And when you are competent in these skills, then I think if this is something that you're interested in, I think you could really take yourself to the next level if you were to pursue this. So CQB is a higher level skill, but it should be earned, I think, personally, and not just handed out like a participation ribbon. So let's wrap it up, gang. Let's see what we've talked about. So CQB it's not just about the tactics themselves. I think that there's a mindset component here. If you treat it like a game, it's just something cool, I think it'll turn around and bite you. If you treat it like a discipline, right, that's going to sharpen the skills that are applicable to you, I think that's where you make your money. I think it will sharpen you greatly. So for civilians with strong fundamentals, a protective mindset, and the humility to train for reality, I think CQB can be a meaningful way to grow your skills as a defender, but it's not the first step, and it's not for everybody, right? So train with a purpose, know your lane, as they say, and always ask, am I preparing for reality or am I just trying to escape it? All right, guys, that's what I've got. Thanks for listening. I hope you found this episode valuable and given you something to think about. If it has, go ahead and share it with a buddy of yours or hit me up in the comments and let me know what you think. Again, shout out to my subscribers. I really appreciate you guys. If you got any questions, just holler at me. If you got topics you want me to cover, hit me up. And until next time, I'm Mark telling you to stay safe, stay sharp, and keep it Pearl Snap.